Welcome to the Part-Time Tech Podcast, where we talk about all things part-time and flexible work in the tech industry. I'm Ernie Park. Today, we have the guy who actually hired me to my last engagement. He's the founder and CEO of a startup called Arcade. Dave Cherrie, welcome, mate. Thanks for hopping on.
Thanks, mate. I appreciate you. Glad to be here.
So I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation for our listeners. Part-time tech, I focus a lot on talent, people who want to work part-time flexibly. I think that message has resonated with a lot of folks for a lot of reasons. But to be honest, the market is sort of set by companies, right? Companies are the people that end up hiring people. And you're one of those folks who did that. I worked fractionally for Arcade, as well as a couple other folks, which we'll dive into. But before that, I'd love to hear a little bit about yourself for the listeners, Arcade, and kind of how this company came to be.
Yeah. Well, I started Arcade a number of years ago while I was working was at college. We call it uni back in Australia, where I grew up in Melbourne. I was doing an engineering degree and finance degree and working in frontline sales, on a part-time basis, and worked in a number of different frontline sales roles. And in each role, it was, nice for the first few months. And then after about, 6 months, it's just very monotonous and unfulfilling. And I quickly became disengaged, and that affected my performance. And out of that sort of boredom, my manager noticed my performance dipping. And so, in collaboration with him and some of the other teammates on the shop floor, so I was working in retail at the time selling cell phones, we started to essentially run like real-time payouts and engaging sort of incentives. So we'd make them competitive. And at the time, I didn't know the word gamification, but it was essentially just gamifying the work that we were doing, but in a meaningful way that was aligned with performance, that was just made every shift go by faster and more rewarding. And before long, we became the highest performing team in the company. And that was really the genesis of like, wow, this is a really powerful thing especially for frontline sales teams, where it's typically an entry-level role for a salesperson, really high disengagement as a kind of a function. And so if we can help solve that problem, that's going to really meaningfully improve the lives of the employees first and foremost. And then also it's going to be a great business case because we meaningfully improve performance for the business. So that was sort of the genesis. The story to get there has been a long one and a rough journey. I moved countries, went through 500 startups out in San Francisco, and we sort of got the product to market, and we're really selling into retail in 2019. And then when 2020 hit, took the wind out of our sails on a lot of fronts, as you can imagine, with retail. But what we found was that really the whole world was starting to go remote, and frontline workers weren't just retail workers or door-to-door sales reps. They were actually now SDRs who are, working their first sales job in a very repetitive, tedious job environment. And now no longer in a bullpen, they're going to work from home in their pajamas, busting out 100 calls a day. And so what's going to keep them engaged? And so it really started in 2020, basically what took 2 years to pivot, but a pivot to really rethink and rebuild Arcade so that we could essentially serve any frontline sales team, no matter where they are. And so we rebuilt the product from the ground up and raised money on that. So we did our first equity round in 21 with Stage 2 Capital, and they've been huge supporters of us. And we went through this sort of rapid growth phase of sales, but also our product was falling apart at the same time because it wasn't really ready. And we had to go through a really, really tough restructure at the end of 2021. So about 18 months ago. And that sort of left us up creek without a paddle. And, we had this legacy product, which was sort of falling apart at the seams, trying to serve all these customers. And we had this new product that wasn't ready to go live yet, that we were so divided on resources on. And then we had no team really to execute on it. So that was the story, and sort of maybe a good helpful segue into how we got connected.
For sure. Yeah. So that takes us to end of about 2021, you said, right? So, Arcade now it's a software platform, started out kind of in these roots serving kind of retail, but always been a software as a service. How big's the team around this time? The entire company?
Yeah. So we're at around about 15 now. We had to just go down, do some unfortunate downsizing recently, like a lot of companies. We've essentially had to restart the whole business again. So we've had to basically go into a part two of the company. yeah, it's exciting. We're sort of seeing the sun through the clouds here, but it's been a long process to get to this point.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's kind of go back to kind of, I guess, around beginning of 2022. Obviously, things are exciting and scary probably all at the same time with COVID, right? New opportunities, but it's like, what the heck is going on in the world? And for startups, cash is kind of king. They're like, so I came in around June, but you also had a couple of my other former coworkers involved that also. Like, walk me through kind of that thought process of how you ended up making some of these fractional hires. Was it something you always knew was like available to you? Was it just like someone recommended to you? I'd love to hear like how you as CEO came to this decision point.
Yeah, it was a, I think a combination of things. The first was, we were in the middle of this huge pivot, and we'd scaled, so we had, double, maybe triple the team size that we are now. A lot of customer growth in 2021, and just this really huge gap in terms of what we expected the product to do and what our engineers would produce to what I was actually getting kind of shipped. And part of that, I think, was that we had all of our engineering in Australia. And so I think just that not having kind of cohesion around sort of both the time frame that the team was working with each other on, and then also proximity to customers, where all of our customers are in North America. So I think that was like a big part of the root cause of the problem. And then the other part was that, like, just having engineering technical leadership that had the experience of running a really effective team in the B2B SaaS space. And, we're a company that's, on a mission to bring dignity and direction to frontline salespeople. And a big part of what our software does is it not only tracks the performance of the employees, but it also financially pays them out for that performance. And so there is a really high bar of efficacy that we need to meet around integration and data and the finance piece. And I think we were just like in a rut, man, because we just couldn't, like, we were really struggling, I guess, to balance those priorities. And also we were getting quite a lot of customer growth, which was exciting, but it also pulls your focus away.
Yeah, I really appreciate your transparency. Like that's something not just startups, but all companies kind of go through at different inflection points, right? And one phrase I heard back when I worked at HubSpot, like I think I might have shared this with you, is like, the only thing worse than no customers is a lot of customers, right?
Yeah.
Then you gotta actually, make sure they're taken care of, and then you gotta listen to the feedback and all that. So it's a lot on that plate. So yeah, I joined the picture around June. How did you even consider hiring someone fractional rather than, hey, we need, a CTO, like a head of engineering in here, which is that's sort of the default, right? It's like, okay, there was a little bit of a leadership gap. You guys needed someone to kind of walk you through kind of this different phase. How did you end up turning to some schmuck like me?
Yeah, so I think coming off that, big restructure that we had to make, we were sort of left with, okay, now we have no engineering. We have a product that's not quite finished, that's been the product of, a year and a bit of rebuilding. We have a legacy product that's not something we want to continue investing in, where we have a lot of customers on that are struggling. So we need to get people moved across as fast as possible. And I think one of the key things that I had noticed, well, I had realized that, which was, the key to our success was going to be always about the technical execution. Like I said, like the product is pretty, requires great technical execution, and we needed to really rebuild the engineering team. It needed to be stateside, and I needed to not take any risks. And I think the big challenge as a startup is you're constantly trying to vie for talent. And in early 2022, late 21, if you remember, it was just like a huge VC bubble. Engineers were so hard to come by. You're paying through the nose for any sort of talent. And so we just couldn't find the right people, and anybody we brought on, it was, few and far between. But the other piece was just getting somebody of the caliber of, somebody who's built and run really high performing engineering teams, knows what great looks like, really understands how to, that's something we just didn't have. And so what I did was I brought on somebody on the go-to-market side. So we had this new product that's, a few months from launch. We're planning to really release it to the big wider world of frontline sales teams. and I wanted some feedback on how we're going to do this really successfully. And that worked out really well. So that was sort of how we got connected, because
Right.
that was sort of like, okay, it's working really well to bring in somebody, say fractionally on something that requires a lot of execution, and the fractional piece, it's like, it's not that they were doing a ton of execution, but they were certainly advising on a lot of the potholes and what not to do, and
Yeah.
questioning, just helping on the strategic side. And I
Right.
think that that's really where I found so much value. And I saw that, hey, we have this huge challenge with engineering. Is this something we could do on an engineering side? And I had no idea if it was possible or not, to bring in people that actually had done it before, seen what success looks like, and can come in and be a force multiplier for a short period of time and get the team into the place it needs to be successful. So
Yeah.
that's how we got connected. And that's really how we started working together.
Absolutely. So just to take a quick step back, how did you get connected to? I won't name him in case he doesn't want to be put on the spot on a podcast. But how did you get connected to that fractional go-to-market leader? Like, who connected you to him? Why did you even consider to have him on board?
Yeah, so our investors, Stage Two, invested in us. They're a kind of early stage VC fund from seed Series A, focus on go to market, focus on B2B SaaS. They invested in us a year prior, and sort of had invested in the thesis of like everything that we were planning to do around expanding into the broader world of frontline sales teams. And they had seen all the great growth we'd seen, and also all the challenging stuff we'd gone through. And so they had sort of been with us on the journey, and they, through their connections, had somebody that they'd worked with in the past, both professionally and on a kind of fractional basis, that had just, I guess, a good depth of understanding across both the go-to-market but also the product side. Right. And that was really where we needed that sort of advice and that feedback. And so they connected me to them, and then working with them, they were able to, help me sequentially knock out different ducks that I needed to knock out to get to a place where we could get the new product live, get our existing customer base migrated to it, get our engineering built back up, and get the kind of company reset like we have. So
yeah, I feel like you have a certain humility where you're able to reach out for help and you're willing to accept that. Obviously every company is unique in certain ways, but in terms of a lot of company building, a lot of the stories like people have done before, right? It might look a little bit different, have a slightly different flavor depending on your vertical, your customer base, whatever. But chances are, if you're building a company, someone's done something like what you're encountering before, right? And that's what was appealing for me when we kind of first had our initial discussions about whether it would be a good fit. It's not that I necessarily was at, 20-person startup and, seed, whatever kind of startup before. But when you talked about the problems and the challenges and the things you guys wanted to do, I was like, that's exactly what I did at, and the types of teams that I had. So that was really appealing. And I think that was where there was a really good fit. Did you feel like you kind of saw that too, at least on the engineering side?
Yeah, I think it's challenging. I've heard mixed reviews of fractional leadership coming in to different functions, and I think different functions have different levels of success. So I think with what was unique about the engagement, especially with you, was I think you brought to the table not only the experience and the the strategic level insight that you could help with sort of the long-term play and helping us get to where we need to go, but also the tactical piece, which was the one-on-ones with engineers, the company culture building, the process building, the operational excellence. So I think that was super valuable to me, that, like you said, you'd come from maybe not working with a 20, 30 person startup, but you'd worked at 20, 30 person teams, and you'd help lead those teams and help be a part of those teams and seen what success looks like. And so for you to come in and actually have both the higher level plane of thought around the strategy, but also being able to get into the weeds and help at the day-to-day stuff. And as a startup, I think, there's lots of chefs often, and there's not enough cooks. So it's good just to have somebody that could do both in a meaningful way.
Yeah, and I think you touched on something important, which is that like there are different levels of like fractional advising, right? I think the other guy helping on the go-to-market side was a little more kind of advisory, like strategic. He wasn't the one doing the things, but he was definitely give you a lot of advice and like what not to do, what to do, and kind of poked you in the right directions there. I think for me, I was maybe like one level deeper into the weeds on the
Mm-hmm.
engineering side because I was actually meeting with the team, but I was still about 10 hours a week, right? Which doesn't sound like a lot, but I feel like it forced me, because this was my first really real fractional engagement, forced me to be really picky with my time,
Mm-hmm.
prioritize, and also be really upfront with you about like, here's what I am able to deliver on, here's what I'm not. For me, that was like a real positive because for me personally, I thought I was very effective. I thought I was able to help you guys a lot and get a lot of bang for your buck, to be honest, right? But
Yeah.
also, I think kind of towards the end, I was able to be honest about like, hey, here's where I'm not able to actually help you guys, and this is where you need to find somebody kind of next. Did that feel like an honest recounting?
Yeah, no, it was. And I must say that that was, I think, the most value that you brought in general was just the candor. And I think there's just a level of like acumen that, you're not promising the world. And you're also not just like, you're not just reporting what you can't do, but you're also informing what we should do about that.
Right.
And so it was like, hey, I can't do this. We need to have either a realignment of priorities. We need to bring somebody in to support that. I can help with that. So you were able to help not only tell me what you couldn't like do, but
Yeah.
also that we needed it done. And if we, want to get it done, here's what the next steps you'd recommend are and how you would support. And I think that was invaluable, man,
Yeah.
because I think that there's probably often two planes of like support you get on a fractional basis. There's one that's sort of like the fractional leadership level, which is very strategic, very
Hmm.
kind of here's my advice, but I don't do anything. Then there's like the contractor level, which is like very like,
Hmm.
you know, scope of work. What do you
Right.
need from me next? And it's like all execution, but no sort of insight into the
Right. Right.
strategy and thoughtfulness of that. And I think what you brought is this great in between phase, which was
Hmm.
what we needed. And I think a lot of startups actually need. And I think that what I know you're doing with part time tech is that like helping people in roles that where they have both that sort of coachability, like the ability to coach the field, but also play a coach. They can play the game
Right.
and
Right.
they sort of partner with the startup with the intention that, hey, they're not here for like a long term necessary. Maybe they are, but like they're here to
Yeah.
help the company grow and what the company needs and to inform on that and then to help execute on that. And that was super helpful.
Yeah, I think I like the way you kind of put that. And I think there's a lot of people kind of in my shoes of like, I wasn't like, an SVP, right? Or like a CTO of some big public company or anything, but I was like a pretty successful manager, I would say, right? So not so far removed from the kind of day to day that I'm like purely like strategic level, like all the way up here, pie in the
Mm-hmm.
sky. And I think that is, like you said, like startups can't just only have that. And you can't just have people in the, you need a little bit of both. So that makes sense. I think another part is really what I learned is the fixed term nature of it actually made it way better for me, and hopefully for you guys to some extent too, because it kind of it's a forcing function. We also had, I can mention his name because he was featured in the newsletter already. Sam Bleckley, he was a
Mm-hmm.
contractor we also had, and we were both on 6-month engagements. Almost, he went like maybe a month or two after longer than me. But one of the things he said to me when he started was, "So I'm already thinking about my handoff in 6 months." Right. So he's already thinking about what do I need to deliver and how do I leave this company in a better place. And when he said that to me, I was like, oh, I need to be thinking 5 months ahead also. Right.
Mm.
So I think to the point you said about Candor too, it's like, hey, like obviously I'm not trying to burn bridges with you or anybody, but like I can just be blunt. Right. And if you don't like me, like, I'm just going to do the best I can, but like, I don't have to tiptoe around anything. Cause like worst case, like, look, this is going to end in 6 months or you just terminate my contract sooner. Right. But like for
Mm.
me to be really effective, I need to just like cut through that. Like I don't have like 7 months of like capital and kingdom building I can do first. Right. So I found that really
Yeah.
valuable where I was like, I don't have all this fluff time to just like, I just got to get right to what's valuable.
I like how you put it. It's a forcing function.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as a startup with limited resources but infinite opportunity,
Hmm.
I think that's one of the hardest things that we face as founders is, what to say no to.
Right.
And that, I think, in itself is such a value add that you bring by coming in and going, okay, what does success look like for
Hmm.
you as the person coming in, and then for the company? And just finding alignment on that. And then, and then it forced us to like say no to stuff. It forced us to like start working on stuff earlier than we probably would have and prioritize that. And it certainly left us better than when we started. And so I think that that's a really, really important part of success. And it's an important part for this startup as well, because the last thing startups want is to not have to have ambiguity around like where the value is being driven.
Right.
So I think like as a startup, like even in terms of advisorships that I've started working through, it's like, I don't do anything anymore unless it's like clearly defined. What
Hmm.
does done look like? And we can continue if we get to done and it's like there's more to do, great, awesome. Let's like re-up. But
Yeah.
it's a great chance for us to like be very clear and box in what we're actually trying to achieve. And I think as a startup as well is why, your experience was so valuable. It's not always super clear exactly what the deliverables are.
Hmm.
So, it's helpful to have like a collaborator to help define those deliverables. It's also invested in, hey,
Right.
over 6 months, what do we want to be successful in?
Right.
And then, collaborate on the outcome.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I think some of the first things that we did was like, where do we want to be? Like, who do we want to hire at the end of this? Cause I'm not, I was going to have a baby. So I knew I could say, I'm done on
Yeah.
this day. So I would say, okay, like, who do you want in this seat after? Right. And it was really good for me to know, like, this is kind of what I'm shooting for. And this is not like indefinite. So I guess going back a little bit to just that decision point, like, nothing is perfect, right? We're obviously painting fractional work in a positive light, but you obviously still had to pay me. You had to pay other guys. Like, how did you think about that in terms of, and I'll be upfront, like, I feel like I wasn't cheap, but I obviously, I think I delivered that value, but yeah, how did you make that kind of decision? Like, what was the calculus in your head? Like, really, like, imagine you're talking to other business owners, other CEOs, founders, right? Like, how did that like trade-off and decision actually like come to bear back in like May or June last year?
Yeah, I think it's super important to, it's for me, what I had learned through bringing on the go to market, the person that was helping with the go to market side of things, they were not cheap at all. But what they had talked with me through was, hey, what are the outcomes that you need as a company? And then they committed to being able to deliver on those outcomes.
Hmm.
And so, really, what you're not paying for is an hourly rate
Yeah.
and somebody to like report to you 9 to 5. What you're paying for is in 6 months, here's what we're going to have as a company. And then as a startup, you just have to make tough calls. We had to make tough calls around, we had to make cuts in different areas to make sure that like we weren't investing in parts of tools or whatever in the business that weren't bringing value to the absolute ultimate goal. And our absolute ultimate goal was getting our engineering rebuilt stateside, getting our new product live, getting all of that done. Like that
Hmm.
was 100% the goal. And so it was more so just vetting, are you the person that can actually deliver on that?
Hmm.
And if you are, then I just look at, whatever it's going to cost as sort of a function of that cost, and I find a way to fund it, because we're not going to be successful as a company unless we get to that place.
Yeah.
And, I was grateful that I had, you weren't somebody I met sort of on Upwork. You were somebody
Hmm.
that came from in network, from people I really trusted that I'd
Right.
worked with before. And I think that that's also the key, is like being able to make an informed decision with somebody that you trust is actually able to execute for you. And and then at the same token, also being somebody that is going to be honest with you
Hmm.
if they can't execute. And I think that that is also the kind of thing that I was really weighing in. So,
Right.
I didn't see it as like an hourly rate. I didn't see it as a
Yeah.
specific sort of like the way I would look at, say, a salary and sort
Yeah.
of a function of productivity. I saw it as a function of outcome and what's it going to cost us to not get to this outcome in that time frame.
Yeah.
And that was far more expensive than to double down on something that was going to give us the best shot of getting there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, one thing I talk about a lot is just like filling the gaps, right? Like there was a little bit of leadership gap, and with a startup, every month is runway, right? And I know I was able to come in before even the kind of the previous leader I was kind of coming in for had even left. So there was even that, like, which you wouldn't have been able to do if you were going to hire your next full-time head of engineering, right? Like that would have taken a lot longer, right? And I'm guessing if you had waited for, let's say it took you 2-3 months to make that hire, 2-3 months not having kind of the goals that progress towards those goals you want could have been really bad.
Totally. Yeah. I think, when you're in a startup, everything's opportunity cost. And that's what you're talking about there. It's like,
Right.
and I also think that was clear to me after we did the initial sort of restructure in late 21 and was sort of left with a very small amount of engineering bandwidth and a lot of engineering work to get done.
Mm-hmm.
And we were really struggling to find engineers to fill those gaps without, we had no leadership in the role. It was just a really tough time. It was just so clear to me. It's like, who's going to want to come and work in this?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you got a lot of work to do before you can really be successful in getting this team built up, productive, getting the new product live, doing all this kind of the tech debt piece, then the team debt piece. And so I think what this gave me was like, that was the other way that I looked at the cost benefit. It was like, okay, it's going to cost us if not more to hold and try to find the right person, recruit them, versus bringing somebody in straight away who can make an impact today, who can really start to just give us a 6-month plan to get to a place where we have really strong engineering at Arcade. Absolutely. And then we're going to be in a great place to go and hire and recruit and attract somebody of the talent profile that we want, that is going to help us be the successful company we want to be. So that to me was also just the other no-brainer piece that, I think you pointed out perfectly.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, opportunity cost, and also just setting things up so that you can take that next step, right? That was one thing I was definitely proud of, is that I felt like I was able to bring in and hire a couple of folks who were really good and queue up. I didn't bring in the next head of engineering, but I helped vet them, help sell them, right? Do all that sort of a thing. And that's hard to do if you don't feel like there's like a leadership in place with like a clear vision kind of in that future. So I'm glad I was able to kind of help out a little bit there. One thing I didn't mention, maybe in case the listeners are interested also, is just like I was helping kind of on strategy, helping the team, doing some coaching. Where I kind of stopped was actually hands-on keyboard work as an individual contributor. There were times where I felt like I needed to, but I just wasn't able to. And that's where I felt like I was pretty upfront with you, Dave, where I was like, my engagement's not going to be able to support that. And that's why we need the urgency to hire that next head of engineering who can spend a little bit of their time more in the trenches with kind of the team, right? And so I felt like I was hopefully doing my duty by being honest about like where I was going to come short. But again, because it was more of a limited engagement, we had the time to find that next person who would kind of fill those gaps.
Yeah. And I think that's what you sort of, when you're going into this sort of thing, you are hoping you hedge against people that aren't self-aware enough to know where they'll be impactful or not.
Right.
And so, that to me was super valuable, and that just you being self-aware enough of where you're going to be impactful and where you're not going to be impactful. And then, like I said, what do I do about it? You're not just leaving me hanging with that. Now you go figure it out. It's like, and here's my suggestion. Here's what I can help with to help you get the right people in place long-term. The other piece as well, which I didn't mention earlier, but was so important was, and I said this to you, and we brought on yourself and another fractional kind of technical leader, and you working more on the engineering excellence, they working on more of the architectural infrastructure excellence. But I said to both of you, after 90 days, can you give me just a no fluff report that I'll share transparently with everybody in the org, with the board, like what's the state of the union for Arcade in terms of this new product, in terms of our technical direction, our decisions, our architecture, blah, blah, blah. And you were able to give a really informed insight into that. And like, hey, here's what's good. Here's what's challenging. Here's what we're going to do about it. And it was and I think that was not only important for me to see, it was also important for any new people we were bringing on board, including that new leadership hire that was going to be full time, that's going to take that step into a startup and take this on, is that they could trust that, hey, they're not going to get a fluffed sales pitch from Ernie.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to get just exactly like what's going on, what the state of the union is. And so one thing I will say is, since we brought on that new leader and he's been really awesome, his feedback to me has been ultimately like, I'm finding nothing surprising.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, there's
music
things I'm learning.
Ears.
Yeah, there's things I'm learning for sure. And there's certainly like things that are popping up, whatever, the natural stuff. But I'm like not coming in and going, oh, this was totally something I was oversold on,
right.
or whatever. And so that's super important to me as well, is that you just have that trust for the person coming in, because then I can know I had the right person.
Right.
Because it's such an important piece of your success as a company, especially as a tech company, is that your technical leadership is just spot on. And so you don't want to be in a place where they're coming in, whether you know it or not, they're coming in when having missed expectations. And I think having your level of, acumen as part of the business and working in it for 6 months, you were able to provide that unique insight that there's no way that I could have done no matter what, because I'm just not very technical.
Well, you got plenty of other skills. So no, it was awesome working with you. I think, I started part-time tech while I was doing the engagement with you guys in Arcade. And it just felt like this is like, for me, it was like, this is sort of a match made in heaven, right? It's like, on the one hand, like I was never going to join Arcade full-time, not because there's anything wrong with Arcade, but just like, it just wasn't the right time. I didn't want to join a startup, and I wasn't in the place to do full-time work. But then here comes, my friend, past coworker reached out. I was like, hey, the startup is looking for someone fractionally. They need these outcomes. And I was like, that's like all the things I'm best at and at the right stage. And you can still do, whatever, and prance around your farm and all that. And I was like, wow, this is like perfect. So I was just like, man, like, can we find more of these types of like win-win situations, right? The thing I try to emphasize too is like fractional is not like everything should be fractional and part-time, right? That's like obviously not the case, but it's just one more tool in your box for company building, right? The fact that like full-time should not always be just the default is, I guess, kind of what I try to emphasize. And yeah, like the other piece there too, just to something that you had mentioned just on working with another fractional leader there too, right? Is like, I was able to come in with someone I actually had past rapport with, right? And I was able to say like, here's one area where I'm actually not able to help you up front. And so I think to what you said about like someone you vet and can trust on the consulting side, being able to have someone who will be honest about what they're not good at and what they can't deliver at. Like if I'm hiring a consultant, I want to hear that in kind of the first call and not just be sold the whole time. Because then you don't kind of know where you're going to end up if they're going to jam what they can do to try to match your outcomes, but they might not, right?
Yeah. And it also invites, I think, a level of dialogue that is just so helpful and healthy that is reciprocated, you know, where I can, the startup or the company that is kind of also evaluating this can also be super candid about, is this going to work for us or not? And it forces you to make those decisions up front and calculate those things up front. And then it's really clear if that's being met as well. So, I think this is, just one of the most challenging parts of any role is quantifying success, measuring progress to that success. And so that the way that it was set up with a very clearly defined outcome, and then, an upfrontness about the conversation around, your capabilities, where you're going to be strong, and then also what the company can do, what's our budget? What can we afford? Is this going to meet our expectations? Is this going to meet what we need as a business? And if we don't know the answer to that, well, then that's food for thought, and grateful to have that time to think about it before I've committed to something. The other piece as well is that, like you said, it's a lot easier to go, okay, this isn't working out within 30 days. A fractional person doesn't take as long to find. You can bring them on quickly if you need to. You can evaluate whether it's working or not very quickly on both sides. And then you can make adjustments quickly. That's so different to like, hey, you've gone through a 3 to 4 month vetting process for a full-time hire. You've paid $1,000 in recruiting fees.
Yep.
You've ramped this person. You want to give them 90 days because you know they
There's
need
probably
that
some
time to figure it.
sunk cost fallacy in there too.
Sunk cost fallacy, right? So you don't want to let them go because you've just invested all this time and you've lost a lot of hair trying to like get them up and running. You want to give, so like maybe it's a whole year before you've actually made a decision, you know? So I think we've actually started doing this on a lot of roles where we've started, not that we're going fractional on everything, but we're doing like a contract to hire period on a couple of roles. And that's been really positive because it's a great chance for like, you know, mutual evaluation. And then there's a lot less downside risk if it doesn't work out. You know, and then just all the upside really, you know, and you pay your premium, and that premium is, you know, that you're paying sort of the rate of that bit. Really, when you look at opportunity costs, it's like, it's huge. It's a huge savings on what it would actually cost you if you went the other way.
And I feel like we could do a whole nother episode about the contract to hire. And I know you gotta run soon, but that's the one other piece. Like I was actually able to hire someone kind of through a contract to hire when I was responsible for hiring. And that made a lot of sense because, you know, I didn't have time to set up a pipeline. We were kind of a little bit short staffed on the engineering side. So getting these engineers to interviewing is expensive, right? So it's like, what if we just get a little bit of a signal, do a contract to hire, and then, you know, like honestly, as an engineering leader, you know, within a week, usually if someone's gonna hit or not. And that's just so much easier. So I think where it's possible, that makes a ton of sense. And I think it lends itself well to kind of this whole ethos of part-time work. So that was actually going to be my other question, is like, how are you thinking about fractional and kind of part-time roles kind of going forward? But I guess you sort of answered that.
Yeah, look, it's something that, yeah, definitely contract to hire is a big thing for us. It's not always possible. But where possible, I think it's something that, you know, it's something that it makes a lot of sense mutually for the employee and for us. We're a startup, so there's, you know, it's got to be a really good fit. You've got to love it because you're in it for a heck of a ride. You know, it's a fun ride, but it's a ride. You know, it's not, you know, a 9-to-5 job per se. And so, yeah, so it's something that I'm certainly thinking about. And then I'm also like, when I look at other functions of the business now, it's like, okay, we've done a really good job. Now we've launched the new product. We've met all of our milestones. Customers are super happy. We're growing month over month, like seeing really good results. You know, we're really expanding like we had planned to a year ago, and we're in a really healthy place. But then now there's like, okay, we're scaling back up, and I've got to look at what are the next functions I need help with.
Right.
And so there's, you know, I'm looking at, can I replicate what we did with the tech team? Is it possible to replicate that sort of part-time person to come in and really help us achieve those outcomes? And so, yeah, it's sort of informing the way I look at the next phase of growth as a business as well.
Yeah. And I think as a leader, like recognizing when you're at different inflection points is key, right? One of the things we talked about at HubSpot is like the person who took HubSpot from like 100,000 of MRR to $1 million might not be the same from like 1 million to 50 million, right? There's very different skills and experience and know-how. So I think as a leader, recognizing that and bringing the right people in, that's just kind of smart business. So Dave, really awesome talking to you. I appreciate the transparency, but also just like your ability to be kind of flexible and humble. And I think you brought the company to like a really good place where like an otherwise, you know, stubborn leader may not have been able to. So yeah, where can people kind of find you? Archaea, you can do a final little plug here.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it, Ernie. Yeah, you can find us at arcade.co. We really help engage frontline salespeople. We do that by tracking and paying out their spiffs and commissions in real time. And we gamify it to make it more engaging, to help you move those mid performers closer to the top and just make for a really strong culture in your business. And we do it in a really seamless way by plugging into any communication tool you're already using and syncing with your, you know, point of sale or your CRM that's tracking your sales performance. So if that's helpful to you, you can check us out at arcade.co. It's totally free to get started. So sign up, and you can also check us out on LinkedIn. And I'm also starting to create a lot of content as well to help frontline sales leaders really think about how they kind of help level up their employees and take their employees to the next level and build a really great, you know, workplace that is conducive to high success for their sales team. So if you're interested in that content, you can find it at our website as well.
Awesome. Dave, I'm a fan of you and Arcade. Thanks so much.
Thanks, brother. Bye.